In a city that worshipped wealth, kindness was a currency with no value. On the glittering sidewalks of Bellagio Avenue, they saw a fallen old woman as an inconvenience, a piece of trash on the pristine pavement. They saw the young waitress who stopped to help her as a fool, wasting her time on someone who had nothing to offer. What none of them knew, as they laughed and pointed, was that they were mocking the matriarch of the Falcone crime family, the mother of the man who owned their city's shadows. The price of their laughter was about to be collected, and the waitress they called a fool was about to inherit a dark and dangerous kingdom. The symphony of midday chaos in downtown Viridia was a familiar tune to Isabella Rossi. It was a composition of screeching tires, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of 1,000 conversations, and the relentless clatter of expensive shoes on polished stone. For Isabella, a waitress at the Gilded Sparrow, a restaurant so exclusive its menu prices looked like serial numbers, this symphony was the soundtrack to her survival. She moved through it with a practiced grace, her mind a ledger of pending orders, demanding customers, and the dwindling balance in her bank account. Her uniform, a starched black dress with a crisp white apron, felt like a second skin, a costume she wore to serve those who lived in a world she could only glimpse through the restaurant's panoramic windows. Today, the lunchtime rush was a particularly brutal beast. A table of hedge fund managers argued loudly over stock options. A famous actress sent back her salad twice because the microgreens were lacking vitality, and Victoria Davenport, a socialite whose family owned half the city's commercial real estate, was complaining that the ice in her water was not melting symmetrically. "It's simply unacceptable," Victoria sighed, waving a dismissive hand laden with diamond rings. "One expects a certain standard." Isabella offered a tight, professional smile. "I'll bring you a fresh glass immediately, Ms. Davenport." As she turned to leave, a commotion outside caught her eye. An elderly woman, dressed in a simple wool coat and sensible worn shoes, had stumbled on an uneven paving stone and fallen hard. Her bag of groceries, a humble collection of bread, oranges, and a carton of milk, had scattered across the sidewalk. A wave of laughter rippled through the outdoor patio diners. "Look at that old bat," one of the hedge fund managers snorted, pointing with his fork. "Can't even walk straight." Victoria Davenport let out a delicate, cruel titter. "Someone should call sanitation. It's spoiling the view." No one moved to help. People swerved around the fallen woman, their faces a mixture of annoyance and contempt. The woman struggled to her hands and knees, her face pale, a trickle of blood blooming from a cut on her temple. Her hands trembled as she tried to gather the rolling oranges. Something inside Isabella snapped. It was the casual cruelty, the complete lack of empathy that clawed at her conscience. Her manager, Mr. Dubois, had a zero-tolerance policy for unscheduled breaks, especially during the lunch rush. Helping that woman could cost her the job she desperately needed, but leaving her there, helpless and humiliated, would cost her a piece of her soul. "Excuse me for one moment," Isabella said, her voice firm, as she set down her serving tray. She ignored Mr. Dubois' warning glare and pushed through the restaurant's heavy glass doors. The air outside was cooler, but the atmosphere felt thick with judgment. As Isabella knelt beside the woman, she could feel the stares of the diners boring into her back. "Are you all right, Mum?" Isabella asked gently, her voice a stark contrast to the derisive murmurs around them. The old woman looked up. Her eyes, a surprisingly sharp and intelligent shade of blue, were clouded with pain and embarrassment. I think so. Just my pride that's broken." "Nonsense. Pride doesn't bruise like a knee," Isabella said, with a small, reassuring smile. She carefully helped the woman to her feet, brushing the dirt from her coat. She noticed the woman's hands were scraped and bleeding. Let's get you cleaned up." She led the woman to a nearby bench, away from the prying eyes of the restaurant patrons. Using the napkins from her apron pocket, she gently dabbed at the cut on the woman's temple and the scrapes on her hands. The oranges had rolled into the street, crushed by passing cars. The carton of milk had burst, creating a white puddle on the grey sidewalk. "My groceries," the woman lamented softly. "Don't you worry about those," Isabella said, gathering the few salvageable items. "We'll get you new ones." From the patio, Victoria Davenport's voice carried clearly. "Can you believe the staff they hire? Fraternizing with street vagrants. It's utterly lowering the tone of the establishment." Isabella's jaw tightened, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She focused on the woman before her, whose quiet dignity was worth more than all the diamonds at the Gilded Sparrow combined. "What's your name?" the woman asked, her voice raspy. "Isabella, but my friends call me Bella." "I am Sophia," the woman replied, offering a weak but genuine smile. "Thank you, Isabella. You have a good heart, a rare thing these days." Isabella helped Sophia into a taxi, pressing a $20 bill from her own meager tips into the driver's hand, along with Sophia's address, which she'd written on a napkin. "Make sure she gets inside safely, please, and this should cover some new groceries," Sophia protested, but Isabella insisted. "Please, it's the least I can do." As the taxi pulled away, Isabella turned back towards the restaurant, bracing herself for the storm. Mr. Dubois stood at the entrance, his face a thundercloud. The laughter from the patio had subsided, replaced by smug, judgmental glares. They saw a foolish waitress who had neglected her duties to help someone worthless. They were blind to the monumental shift that had just occurred in the city's unseen balance of power. They had laughed at Sofia Falcone, and in doing so, had unknowingly placed themselves in the crosshairs of her son. Miles away, in a penthouse office that overlooked Viridia like a hawk's nest, Dante Falcone watched the city breathe. The office was a study in controlled power, mahogany desk, black leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows of armored glass. There were no family photos, no personal trinkets. The only decoration was a single, framed Latin proverb on the wall: "Silentium est aurum." Silence is golden. Dante was a man carved from shadow and steel. His movements were economical, his gaze intense, and his reputation was a weapon in itself. He was the head of the Falcone family, an organization that owned the city's soul, from its shipping ports to its politicians. He was a ruthless businessman and a fearsome adversary, a man who had inherited an empire and solidified its foundations with blood and fear. His relationship with his mother, Sophia, was a quiet, aching complexity. He loved her fiercely, but she was a woman of old-world values who abhorred the violence of his life. She refused to live in his fortified mansion, choosing instead a modest but comfortable brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, a remnant of a simpler life with her late husband. It was her silent protest against the man he had become. Out of respect for her wishes, he kept his distance, but she was never out of his sight. His protection was a silent, invisible cloak she wore every day. His most trusted lieutenant, Marco, stood before the desk, his expression impassive. Marco was the only one who had seen Dante show anything resembling vulnerability, and he guarded that knowledge like a state secret. "The report from the detail on your mother, boss," Marco said, his voice a low rumble. Dante didn't look up from the financial reports on his desk. "Anything to note?" "There was an incident an hour ago, on Bellagio Avenue. She took a fall." Dante's pen stopped moving. The silence in the room became heavy, charged. He slowly raised his head, his dark eyes locking onto Marco's. "Is she hurt?" "A few scrapes, a cut on her forehead. Refused a doctor." She's home now, resting. The detail said she was more shaken and embarrassed than anything. Marco paused. But that's not the whole story. Dante's jaw clenched. Go on. Marco recounted the scene with meticulous detail. The fall, the scattered groceries, the jeering crowd of wealthy patrons at the Gilded Sparrow. He described the socialite, Victoria Davenport, and her cruel remarks. Then he described the waitress. No one helped her, except for one of them, a waitress. Name's Isabella Rossi. She left her post mid-shift, cleaned your mother's wounds, called her a taxi, and paid for the fare and new groceries out of her own pocket. Dante listened, his face an unreadable mask of granite. But inside, a cold, precise rage began to build. The thought of his mother, the formidable woman who had raised him, lying helpless on a sidewalk while the city's elite laughed at her, was an unforgivable insult. It was a stain on his honor, a failure of the invisible protection he had built around her. But mixed with that rage was a flicker of something else. Intrigue. In his world, kindness was a commodity, always offered with an ulterior motive. An act of genuine, selfless compassion was an anomaly, a variable he hadn't accounted for. This waitress, Isabella Rossi, had risked her livelihood for a stranger. She had shown his mother dignity when the rest of the world had shown her contempt. This waitress, Dante said, his voice dangerously soft. Tell me about her. Marco slid a thin file across the polished desk. Dante's intelligence network was frighteningly efficient. Isabella Rossi, 24 years old, an orphan, grew up in the state system, no family, no connections, works 2 jobs to cover rent and night classes at the community college, studying art history, clean record. By all accounts, she's quiet, hard-working, and keeps to herself. Dante opened the file. The picture inside was a candid shot, likely from her employee ID. She had warm, expressive eyes, a determined set to her mouth, and a weariness about her that spoke of long hours and little rest. She looked ordinary, and yet she had done something extraordinary. He closed the file. The rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was now focused. The laughing crowd would be dealt with. A lesson in respect was long overdue. But first, he needed to understand the girl. He needed to see for himself what kind of person would stand against the current of indifference and offer a helping hand. Marco, he said, standing and walking to the window. He stared down at the city, a kingdom of ants scurrying below. Cancel my afternoon. I'm going to have lunch at the Gilded Sparrow. Marco nodded, understanding the unspoken command. Dante wasn't going for the food. He was going to observe the anomaly. He was going to step into the world of the ordinary waitress who had, in one simple act of kindness, captured the attention of the most dangerous man in Viridia. The Gilded Sparrow operated on a strict hierarchy of wealth. The more you had, the better your table, the more obsequious the service. When Dante Falcone walked in, clad in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Isabella's annual salary, the hierarchy shattered. He didn't have a reservation, yet the moment he stepped through the door, a palpable hush fell over the dining room. Mr. Dubois, who had just finished giving Isabella a final, scathing warning about her earlier stunt, practically sprinted to the entrance, his face a mask of fawning panic. Mr. Falcone, what an unexpected honor. We will have the best table for you immediately. Dante's gaze swept the room, cold and dismissive, until it landed on Isabella. She was resetting a table in the corner, her movements deft and efficient, her expression strained. She hadn't noticed him yet. That won't be necessary, Dante said, his voice a low command that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. I will take a table in her section. He gave a subtle nod in Isabella's direction. Dubois' face went pale. Huh? But sir, she is one of our junior waitresses. Allow me to have our most experienced server, Julian, attend to you. I was not asking for your opinion, Dante stated flatly. The implied threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Seat me in her section. Now. Isabella finally looked up, her eyes widening slightly as she saw the commotion. She recognized the man from news clippings her landlord used to wrap fish, the reclusive, powerful head of the Falcone group. A knot of dread formed in her stomach. The last thing she needed was a high-profile, demanding customer after the day she'd had. Dante was seated at a small table for two, a spot usually reserved for less important guests. He dismissed Dubois with a wave and waited. When Isabella approached, her notepad in hand, her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I get you something to start with?" she asked, her voice impressively steady. Dante didn't look at the menu. He looked at her. His eyes were intense, analytical, as if he were trying to see past the waitress uniform and into her very thoughts. Just water. Still no ice. It was an odd request for a man of his stature, but Isabella simply nodded and went to fill the order. As she returned, she saw that Victoria Davenport and her friends were watching from their prime table, whispering behind their manicured hands. They were clearly amused that the infamous Dante Falcone was being served by the vagrant-loving waitress. Isabella placed the glass of water on the table. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more moments?" "I am in no hurry," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Tell me, Isabella, is it common practice at this establishment for the staff to abandon their duties to assist strangers on the street?" The question was a direct hit. Isabella's cheeks flushed. She expected a complaint, a threat to have her fired. She lifted her chin. "No, sir, it is not. And yet you did it anyway. Why?" She hesitated, unsure how to answer. This wasn't a normal customer. This was a man who dissected every word, every gesture for weakness. "She needed help," Isabella said simply. No one else was helping her. "Kindness is a luxury not many can afford," Dante observed, his tone neutral. "It can be a dangerous liability." Before Isabella could respond, Victoria Davenport decided to make her move. She glided over to their table, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "Dante, darling, I had no idea you frequented this place. If I had known you were here, I would have insisted you join us." She completely ignored Isabella, as if she were a piece of furniture. Dante didn't smile back. "Victoria," he said her name as if it were a distasteful word. "I do hope your lunch hasn't been spoiled," she continued, casting a pointed, venomous look at Isabella. "The service can be so inconsistent. We had a rather unpleasant incident earlier with this one. Utterly unprofessional." Isabella braced herself, expecting to be fired on the spot. This was it. Victoria Davenport, a woman who could buy and sell this restaurant 12 times over, had just publicly condemned her to the most powerful man in the city. Dante took a slow, deliberate sip of his water. He placed the glass down with a soft click. "On the contrary, Victoria," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "I was just telling Miss Rossi how impressed I am. It seems the Gilded Sparrow has an employee who still values basic human decency, a quality your family's money clearly cannot buy." Victoria's smile froze, then crumbled. The public rebuke was like a physical slap. She stammered, her face turning a blotchy red. I don't know what you mean." "You laughed at a fallen old woman," Dante stated, not as a question, but as a final judgment. "I find that to be in exceptionally poor taste. Now, if you'll excuse us, Ms. Rossi and I were having a conversation." Humiliated, Victoria fled back to her table, gathering her things in a flurry and leaving without another word. The entire restaurant had witnessed her dismissal. Dante turned his attention back to Isabella, who stood frozen in shock. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick money clip, and peeled off several large bills. He placed them on the table. It was more than $2,000. "This is for the water," he said. "And for your time." Isabella stared at the money, speechless. I can't accept this. You are not in a position to refuse," he said, and the words were laced with an authority that left no room for argument. He stood, his imposing frame seeming to shrink the space around him. "I believe your shift is over soon. Be careful on your way home, Isabella." He turned and walked out, leaving a stunned restaurant in his wake. Isabella was left standing by the table, her mind reeling. He knew her name. He had defended her, and he had warned her. She looked at the pile of money, then at the door through which he had vanished. She had no idea that she had just passed a test, and in doing so had drawn the protective and possessive gaze of a predator. The $2,000 wasn't just a tip, it was a down payment. He had just purchased a stake in her life. A few days after the incident at the Gilded Sparrow, Isabella's life returned to a semblance of normalcy, albeit a normalcy now tinged with a constant, low-grade anxiety. The $2,000 sat in an envelope under her mattress, feeling less like a blessing and more like a time bomb. She had tried to give it to Mr. Dubois to put in the restaurant's general tip pool, but he had looked at her as if she were insane, shoving it back into her hands and whispering, "Are you trying to get us all killed? What Mr. Falcone gives, you take." Her co-workers now treated her with a strange mixture of awe and fear. They kept their distance, as if she were radioactive. The story of how she had inadvertently caused the public humiliation of Victoria Davenport and received an astronomical tip from the city's most feared man had become restaurant legend. One sunny afternoon, during a break between her shifts, Isabella was sketching in a small park near her apartment when a familiar voice called her name. "Isabella." She looked up to see Sophia, the elderly woman from the sidewalk. She looked much better now. The cut on her temple had faded to a small bruise, and she walked with a sturdy, determined gait. She was carrying a small, beautifully wrapped box. "Sophia, it's so good to see you. Are you feeling all right?" Isabella said, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "I am much better, thanks to you," Sophia said, sitting on the bench beside her. Her blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "I wanted to thank you properly. I've been asking around the neighborhood near that restaurant. A baker told me a waitress matching your description lived in this area." Isabella felt a prickle of unease at the idea of being so easily found, but Sophia's warm presence quickly dispelled it. "You didn't have to do that. Nonsense. A kindness like yours should not go unrewarded." Sophia handed her the box. "This is for you." Inside was a delicate silver chain with a small, intricately carved locket. It was clearly old and very valuable. "Sophia, I can't. This is too much." "It was my mother's," Sophia said softly. "She told me to give it to someone with a courageous heart. I think she would approve of you. Please, it would bring me great joy if you would accept it." Reluctantly, Isabella allowed Sophia to fasten the locket around her neck. It felt cool against her skin. An unspoken bond formed between them in that moment. Over the next 2 weeks, they met regularly. They would have coffee, walk through the park, or sit and talk for hours. Sophia spoke of her late husband, a stonemason who loved opera, and of her childhood in a small village by the sea. She was intelligent, witty, and had a strength that Isabella deeply admired. But Sophia never spoke of her son. Whenever the topic of family came up, a shadow would pass over her face, a deep and profound sadness that Isabella didn't dare to probe. Isabella found herself confiding in Sophia, telling her about her dreams of one day working in a museum, of her struggles to make ends meet. Sophia listened with an empathy that felt almost maternal. For the first time in her life, Isabella felt like she had someone who cared for her, someone who felt like family. Meanwhile, in the city's underworld, Dante Falcone's unusual behavior had not gone unnoticed. His rivals, the Moretti family, led by the cunning and ambitious Silvio Moretti, were always watching for a weakness in the Falcone empire. Dante was known for his cold discipline. He had no vices, no mistresses, no weaknesses they could exploit. Until now. Silvio's informants reported on Dante's strange lunch at the Gilded Sparrow. They reported on the massive tip. And now they reported on the burgeoning friendship between Dante's reclusive mother and a penniless waitress. In the back room of a smoky social club, Silvio Moretti studied a grainy photograph of Isabella and Sophia laughing together on a park bench. So, the Iceman has a soft spot, Silvio mused to his underboss. He's never shown this kind of interest in anyone. He puts Victoria Davenport in her place for this girl. His mother, who sees no one, is meeting her for coffee. What do you think it is, boss? A girl? Is he sweet on her? Silvio tapped the photograph. I don't know. But I know a vulnerability when I see one. The Falcone fortress has always been impenetrable because he keeps everyone at arm's length. This girl, she is inside his walls, whether she knows it or not. He has brought her into his circle. An evil smile spread across Silvio's face. We have spent years looking for a crack in his armor. Maybe we don't need to attack Dante Falcone directly. Maybe we just need to remove the girl. The decision was made. Isabella Rossi, whose only crime had been an act of kindness, was now a pawn in a very dangerous game. The quiet comfort she had found with Sophia was about to be shattered. As she walked home from her shift that evening, clutching the silver locket around her neck, she was unaware of the two men sitting in a dark sedan parked down the street, their eyes following her every move. The warmth of Sophia's friendship had brought a light into her life, but it had also cast a long, dark shadow that was about to overtake her. The attack came on a Tuesday night. It was late, and a cold, persistent drizzle had slicked the streets of Viridia, making the city lights bleed across the pavement. Isabella was walking the last few blocks home from the bus stop, her collar pulled up against the damp chill. The street was quiet, almost deserted. She clutched the strap of her bag, a familiar sense of unease creeping up her spine. It was a feeling she'd had for the past few days, a sense of being watched, the prickle on the back of her neck that she couldn't shake. A black town car, its engine a low purr, pulled up beside her. Isabella quickened her pace, her heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The car matched her speed. The back door swung open, and two large men in dark suits stepped out, blocking her path. "Isabella Rossi?" one of them asked, though it wasn't a question. Fear, cold and sharp, seized her. "Who are you?" "I don't want any trouble." "Mr. Moretti just wants a word," the other man said, reaching for her arm. Isabella reacted on pure instinct. She swung her heavy bag, filled with textbooks, and caught the man squarely in the face. He staggered back with a grunt of pain. She turned to run, but the other man was faster. He grabbed her, his hand clamping over her mouth, muffling her scream. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, but it was like fighting against a stone wall. He was dragging her towards the open door of the car when the night exploded into controlled chaos. From the shadows, two other figures emerged. They moved with a silent, deadly efficiency that was terrifying to behold. Isabella recognized one of them from the Falcone penthouse. It was Marco. There was no shouting, no prolonged struggle. There was the dull thud of fists hitting flesh, a sharp crack of a bone breaking, and a choked cry of pain. In less than 10 seconds, Silvio Moretti's men were on the ground, groaning and incapacitated. Marco stood over them, his suit immaculate, not a single hair out of place. He looked at Isabella, who was leaning against the wall, trembling uncontrollably, her eyes wide with terror. "Are you harmed, Ms. Rossi?" he asked, his voice calm and professional, as if this were a routine business transaction. Before she could answer, a second car, a sleek black Maserati, pulled up to the curb. The back door opened, and Dante Falcone stepped out. He moved through the rain-slicked night like a panther, his presence immediately commanding the entire scene. His eyes, dark and furious, took in the sight of the downed men, and then they locked on Isabella. He saw her pale face, her terrified eyes, and the way she was shaking. The cold fury in his expression intensified into a glacial rage. He walked over to one of Moretti's men, who was trying to crawl away, and pressed the sole of his expensive leather shoe onto the man's hand, pinning it to the wet asphalt. "Who sent you?" Dante's voice was a low, chilling whisper, more frightening than any shout. The man whimpered. "Moretti! Silvio Moretti! What did he want with her?" "Just to talk, to send you a message." Dante applied more pressure, and the sound of cracking bones echoed in the silent street. The man screamed. "The next time Silvio Moretti wants to send me a message," Dante snarled, "he can deliver it himself. Tell him that if he or anyone associated with him so much as looks in her direction again, I will burn his entire world to the ground. Do you understand?" The man nodded frantically, tears of pain streaming down his face. Dante removed his foot and turned his back on the pathetic scene. His attention now focused entirely on Isabella. He walked towards her slowly. Isabella shrank back against the wall, her mind unable to process what was happening. This was a nightmare. The polite, intense man from the restaurant was a monster, a creature of violence and intimidation. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why is this happening?" Dante stopped a few feet from her. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and his eyes seemed to burn in the dim light. He looked at the men his lieutenant had dispatched, then back at her. The time for secrets and subtle observation was over. "You helped an old woman who fell on the street," he began, his voice devoid of its earlier menace, now laced with a weary gravity. "You showed her a kindness that no one else would. You sat with her, you cleaned her wounds, and you protected her dignity." Isabella stared at him, confused. "What does that have to do with this?" Dante took a step closer. The air crackled with the unspoken truth. "That woman you helped, her name is Sofia Falcone." He let the name hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final, life-altering blow. "She is my mother." The world tilted on its axis. Isabella's mind raced, connecting the impossible dots. The old woman's quiet strength, her sadness when family was mentioned, Dante's sudden appearance at the restaurant, his defense of her, the cryptic warning, the feeling of being watched. It all crashed down on her with the force of a physical impact. She had helped the mother of the city's most powerful and feared mafia boss. Her act of simple compassion hadn't just earned her a thank you and a locket. It had thrust her into the center of a brutal war she didn't even know existed. She wasn't just Isabella Rossi, the struggling waitress anymore. She was a person of interest to the Falcone family, and a target for all their enemies. The realization was as terrifying as the violence she had just witnessed. The ride to Dante Falcone's mansion was a blur of silence and rain-streaked city lights. Isabella sat in the back of the Maserati, as far from Dante as the plush leather seat would allow. She was wrapped in his suit jacket, an unconscious gesture he'd made before bundling her into the car. It smelled of expensive cologne, rain, and something else, something dangerous and metallic that she didn't want to identify. His mansion wasn't a home, it was a fortress. Perched on a cliff overlooking the city, it was a modern monolith of glass, steel, and stone, surrounded by high walls and armed guards who materialized from the shadows. The interior was vast, cold, and impeccably decorated, but it held none of the warmth of a lived-in space. It was a museum of power, curated by a man who trusted no one. Sophia was there, waiting in the cavernous living area. The moment she saw Isabella, her face, etched with worry, crumpled in relief. She rushed forward and embraced her, holding her tightly. "Oh, my dear girl, I am so sorry. This is all my fault," Sophia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's not your fault," Isabella murmured into her shoulder. The familiar, maternal comfort, a small anchor in the terrifying storm she'd been thrown into. Dante watched them, his expression unreadable. "She's safe now, Mother. That's what matters." Sophia pulled back, turning her tear-filled, angry eyes on her son. "Safe? She is safe in your golden cage, Dante? She's only in danger because of you, because of what you are. I am what I have to be to protect what is ours," he replied, his voice hard. "And she is now part of that. Moretti made her a target. I will not let him have her." The argument was old, a raw wound between them that would never fully heal. Isabella stood between them, the unwilling catalyst for their pain. Later, after Sophia had led Isabella to a luxurious guest suite and given her a cup of hot, sweet tea to calm her nerves, Dante appeared at the door. "We need to talk," he said simply. Isabella followed him to a study, a room lined with books that looked as though they had never been read. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it did little to warm the chilling atmosphere. "I'm not a prisoner," Isabella stated, her voice shaking but defiant. She would not let him see how terrified she was. "No," he agreed, turning to face her. "You are a guest. But for now, you cannot leave. To go back to your apartment would be a death sentence. Silvio Moretti does not make idle threats. He sees you as my weakness." "I am not your weakness. I am not anything to you," she shot back, her fear finally giving way to anger. "I helped your mother. That's all. I didn't ask for any of this. The violence, the fear, your blood money." "The money was not a payment," he said, his voice lowering. "It was a test. I wanted to see if you were genuine. I needed to know if your kindness had a price. It does not. That makes you unique, and it makes you a liability in my world." He walked closer, circling her like a predator, studying its prey. "You have two choices, Isabella. The first is you walk out that door. I will give you enough money to disappear, to start a new life somewhere no one knows you. But Moretti and men like him have long memories. They will hunt you. You will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Or you can stay. Here, under my protection. No one can touch you here. I will give you anything you want. Safety, comfort, wealth beyond your imagination. You can continue your studies. I will build you a private museum if you desire it. You will want for nothing." "And what's the price for that?" she asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. "What do you get in return?" His intense gaze locked onto hers. For the first time, she saw something flicker behind the cold, hard mask. A deep, profound loneliness. He saw in her the goodness that was so absent in his own life, a light he was inexplicably drawn to. "You will be a reminder," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A reminder of what my mother values. A reminder that not everything in this world is corrupt." He took another step, closing the distance between them. "The price is your freedom. You will be safe, but you will be mine to protect. Your life will be tied to mine." It was a gilded cage, just as Sophia had said. A life of luxury bought with her liberty. A choice between a life of constant fear on the run or a life of suffocating safety at the heart of a criminal empire. She thought of her lonely apartment, her 2 dead-end jobs, the constant struggle to survive. Then she thought of the warmth in Sophia's embrace, the feeling of belonging she'd had with her. And she looked at Dante, a man of violence and shadows who was offering her a sanctuary built on that very violence. An undeniable, dangerous attraction sparked between them, the moth and the flame. He was everything she should have hated, yet he was the only one offering her a future. "I don't want your money or your museums," Isabella said, her voice steady now. "If I stay for Sophia, and I stay on my own terms." A slow ghost of a smile touched Dante Falcone's lips. It didn't reach his eyes, but it was a start. He had offered her a cage, and instead of rattling the bars, she was demanding to redecorate. He found himself intrigued, and for a man like Dante, intrigue was a far more potent and dangerous emotion than love. He nodded. "As you wish." The choice had been made. Isabella Rossi, the waitress, had stepped out of the light and into the shadows, gambling her life on the hope that her kindness could survive in the heart of the darkness. Life within the Falcone fortress was a paradox. Isabella was surrounded by unimaginable opulence, yet she felt a profound isolation. She had a staff to attend to her every need, a library filled with rare art books, and a view of the city that most people only dreamed of. But the armed guards were a constant reminder of her status as a protected asset. She was safe, but she was not free. Her bond with Sophia deepened. They spent their days together, 2 women from different worlds finding common ground. Sophia taught her to make traditional pasta from scratch. Isabella introduced Sophia to the classic films she loved. They were a small island of warmth in the cold, sterile mansion. Dante remained an enigma. He was a creature of the night, coming and going at odd hours. Their interactions were brief, formal, yet charged with an unspoken tension. He would watch her from across the room as she laughed with his mother, a strange, contemplative look on his face. He began to change in small, almost imperceptible ways. He started taking his evening meal at home, rather than in his office or at a club. He would listen as Isabella and Sophia talked, a silent observer, soaking in a domesticity he had long since forsaken. Isabella did not shy away from confronting him. "This isn't a life," she told him one evening, gesturing to the armored windows. "It's an existence. Your mother deserves better." "My mother deserves to be safe," he countered, his voice hard. "She deserves to be happy," Isabella retorted. "There's a difference. She wants her son, not a warden." Her words struck a chord he thought had long gone silent. Her courage, her refusal to be intimidated by him, was chipping away at the icy walls he had built around his heart. The inevitable confrontation with Silvio Moretti came sooner than expected. Driven by arrogance and the belief that Dante had gone soft, Silvio made a foolish, desperate move. He didn't target Isabella again. He targeted Sophia. His men ambushed her during a rare, heavily guarded visit to her husband's grave. It was a declaration of war, a sacrilegious act in their world. But they had underestimated Dante's reach and the loyalty he commanded. Marco and his team were prepared. The ensuing firefight was brutal and short. When the news reached the mansion, Dante became a figure of pure, cold fury. But before he left to handle the situation personally, he sought out Isabella. He found her in the library, her face pale with fear for Sophia. "She is safe," he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. They never got close. "But this ends tonight. Don't do something you'll regret," she pleaded, seeing the murderous intent in his eyes. He looked at her, and for a moment the mask of the Mafia Boss slipped, revealing the man beneath. "The only thing I would regret," he said, his voice surprisingly soft, "is allowing my world to harm the only two people who make it worth living in." He reached out and gently touched the locket at her throat. "Stay with her." Dante's retribution was swift, silent, and absolute. By dawn, the Moretti family was no longer a factor in Viridia's underworld. They were simply gone. Dante returned to the mansion as the sun was rising, a single cut on his cheek and a weariness in his bones that went deeper than exhaustion. He found Isabella asleep in a chair beside his mother's bed, where she had kept vigil all night. Sophia was sleeping peacefully. He stood in the doorway, watching the woman who had stumbled into his life, and had, with nothing more than her own quiet strength and compassion, turned it completely upside down. She hadn't just earned his protection. She had earned his respect, and something more, something he was not yet ready to name. He knew he could never leave his world. It was his legacy, his curse. But with her by his side, he could perhaps change what that legacy meant. He could rule with fear, as he always had, but maybe he could also learn to lead with a sliver of her light. When Isabella awoke, she found a blanket draped over her, and Dante, sitting in a chair across the room, watching her. The sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The long night was over. "It's finished," he said. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She could see it in his eyes. A chapter had closed, violently and permanently, but a new one was beginning. Her life would never be simple again. It would be a life of shadows and danger, of gilded cages and unspoken truths. But as she looked at Dante Falcone, the city's dark king, she no longer saw a monster. She saw a man fighting his own demons, a man who had found something worth protecting more than his own power. She had shown kindness to a fallen old woman, and in return, she had inherited a kingdom and the heart of its king. A month passed, and a fragile, surreal peace settled within the walls of the Falcone estate. The immediate threat of the Moretti family was a ghost, a story whispered among the household staff and the grim-faced men who patrolled the perimeter. For Isabella, life had become a routine of quiet luxury. She spent her mornings in the vast library, finally able to immerse herself in the art history books she had only ever dreamed of affording. Her afternoons were for Sophia, filled with shared meals, walks through the manicured gardens, and the easy comfort of a bond that had become the anchor of her new reality. Yet, a deep restlessness stirred within her. She was a bird in a magnificent cage, safe from the hawks, but unable to fly. She ate food she didn't earn, wore clothes she didn't buy, and lived a life funded by a machinery of darkness she tried desperately not to contemplate. This was not living. It was waiting. The terms she had demanded of Dante, her own terms, remained undefined, and she knew that if she didn't claim her agency, she would slowly fade into another beautiful, silent object in Dante Falcone's collection. She found him one evening in his study, the same room where she had made her fateful choice. He was staring into the fire, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, the flames dancing in his dark, unblinking eyes. He seemed more man than monster in these quiet moments, burdened by the weight of his empire. "Dante," she said, her voice soft but firm. He didn't seem startled. He always seemed to know when she was near. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping over her. "Isabella, is everything all right?" "No," she said simply, walking further into the room. "It's not. I am grateful for your protection. I am grateful for your mother's friendship. But I cannot be a kept woman. I cannot just exist here." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You are not a prisoner." "Aren't I?" she challenged, her voice gaining strength. "My world is these walls. My choices are what book to read or what to have for dinner. I told you I would stay on my own terms. It's time to define them." He set his glass down, giving her his full, unnerving attention. "What is it you want? A car? A private tutor? Name it." "I don't want things, Dante. I want purpose." She took a deep breath, gathering the courage she had been building for weeks. "You have a fortune built on activities that cast long shadows. Your name is feared in this city. Your mother lives in sorrow because of it." His eyes narrowed, a warning glint within them. "Be careful." "No," she said, standing her ground. "I won't be. Because I think you want the same thing she does. A legacy that isn't written in blood and fear." She gestured around the opulent room. "All this power, all this money. What good is it if it only inspires terror? What if it could be used to build something instead of just breaking things?" He was silent, watching her, waiting. "I want to start a foundation," she declared. "The Falcone Foundation for the Arts. I want to build a youth center in the same neighborhood I grew up in, a safe place for orphans and at-risk kids, a place with art supplies, music lessons and mentors, a place that shows them there is beauty in the world and that they have value." He stared at her, as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "You want to take my money, the money you so clearly despise, and give it away to street children? I want to launder your legacy, Dante," she said bluntly. "I want to create something so good, so pure, that it begins to balance the scales. I want your mother to be able to say the name Falcone with pride. And I want to be the one to build it." He was quiet for a long time, the only sound the crackling of the fire. He walked to the window, looking out at the glittering lights of the city he owned. "It's a dangerous idea," he said finally, his back to her. "It puts a public face on us. It makes you a target again, in a different way. It shows a weakness. It shows strength," she countered, her voice ringing with conviction. "It shows that the Falcone family is more than just shadows and whispers. It shows you're a pillar of the city, not just its predator. Kindness isn't a weakness, Dante. It's the most powerful weapon you're not using." He turned around slowly. The cold, calculating mask of the Mafia Boss was gone. In its place was a look of raw, unguarded contemplation. He was looking at her not as a waitress, or a liability, or a protected asset, but as an equal. A queen who had just laid out her strategy in his war room. "This will be your project," he said, his voice a low rumble of concession. "You will have an unlimited budget. My lawyers will handle the paperwork. Marco will oversee your security detail. But it will be your vision, your work. I will not interfere." A wave of triumphant relief washed over her. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," he warned, stepping closer until he was standing just in front of her. "You are wading into treacherous waters, Isabella. You may be building with one hand, but I will still be breaking things with the other to keep you safe. The world outside these walls will not change. But perhaps, he said, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper as he reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the world inside them can. She had won. It wasn't just permission, it was a coronation. She was no longer a guest in his fortress. She was its new architect, tasked with building a wing of light onto a palace of shadows. The story of Isabella and Dante is a testament to the idea that the smallest act of kindness can echo in the most unexpected places, changing the course of destinies. It shows that true power isn't always held by those with the most money or the deadliest reputation, but sometimes by those with the courage to show compassion in a world that has forgotten its value. Bella's journey from a humble waitress to the heart of the Falcone family is a thrilling ride through darkness and light, proving that even the hardest of hearts can be touched by genuine goodness. If you were moved by Isabella's courage and Dante's dark, protective devotion, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this story with a friend who loves a tale of unexpected power and heart-pounding romance. Most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story where the underestimated rise up to claim their destiny. Your support makes all of this possible. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.